Typical fish farm in a 16 to 18 month production program, 200,000 pounds of fecal and food waste fall from the pen to the ocean bottom. 200,000 pounds over a 16 to an 18 month process. Fecal and food waste come from this activity. If you and I go out in a small boat and we throw a potato chip overboard, they will throw the book at us. But fish farmers are allowed to generate that kind of fecal and food waste, and no one says a word. I'm Stuart. I'm managing director of Tangier Lobster Company. We are located on the eastern coast of Nova Scotia in Atlantic Canada. Our business model is to export premium quality Canadian live hardshell lobster to 21 countries around the world. We export extensively through Europe and extensively through Asia. We also do business in Canada and we do business in America. We're packing lobsters today for Las Vegas, for instance. We aim to provide our clients with the best of the best in wild-caught fisheries. We encountered, going back to 1996, with our first real experience with a feedlot fish farm. We were storing lobster in Back Bay, New Brunswick. The local fish farmers there were using pesticides to treat the lice on their salmon. They were using an illegal pesticide at the time.
Illegal?
It escaped from their... Sorry?
This was an illegal pesticide?
Yes, they were bringing in a pesticide that was not legal in Canada, but it was really effective to treat the lice. To make a very long story short, the pesticide drifted over in the current to the area where we were storing lobster. 3 companies were involved on the lobster storage, and we all had massive mortality of our lobster through small exposure to the pesticide. And that was when I first learned, going back to 1996, that fish farms and pesticide use associated with them wasn't at all compatible with the wild fisheries. And so over the last 10 years in particular, we have spoken out, I've written, I've presented. We try to get the message out there that not only are fish farms not producing a healthy or sustainable product, but they place the wild fisheries in significant jeopardy.
How long have the salmon farms been in that area?
Well, in the area where we first encountered them in New Brunswick was a leader in aquaculture, in open net pen fish farms. And so they go back, to the late 80s, I believe. In our area in Nova Scotia, it's a more recent development of the last 10 or 15 years. In our own immediate area, where we're located here on the Eastern Shore, they wanted to develop a fish farm, in fact, 3 locations 6 years ago, and the community said, no, we have no interest in that. It's not compatible with our wild fisheries or our environment or our pristine brand, and the government backed down and didn't give the applicant authorization. But there are fish farms located in a number of communities in Nova Scotia, and they're very extensive in New Brunswick.
Okay, that's great that the government listened and the community stepped up. Are there any communities that you know of that actually embrace fish farming, salmon farming?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, Marcus, in the sense that it tends to be quite political. The fish farms have a bit of a divide and conquer strategy. They will target those in the community who have the most to gain and try to encourage their favor, because they know that there will be many in the community who are aware of the challenge and who will resist them. So many communities are 60-40 opposed or 60-40 in favor. Fish farms over the last 10 to 15 years have been highly controversial. Those that support them think that jobs are associated with them in rural communities. Those that oppose them know the real business model and know that they're not job creators. They're not sustainable in terms of their business model. They're a net negative to the community. The only reason they've lasted in Canada is our provincial and federal governments historically promoted them, subsidized them, compensated them when they had mass mortality. The payouts were so high that now the government isn't as anxious to give insurance protection. But the governments have assumed and been convinced by the fish farmers that these farms were helpful to rural communities. The truth is they are not. They're anything but helpful. They aggregate any profit they make straight back to the ownership. It's not a job creator in any significant way compared to the wild fisheries.
I was going to ask if you knew of any kind of numbers what an average farm would employ versus what, is lost in the community from not having the wild catch. I know
there are others who can give numbers chapter and verse. I would simply say that as compared with the employment the industry suggests they offer, it's about 30 to 40% of what they suggest they employ. The numbers are inflated. They tend to be accepted by government, although government's in an ideal position to confirm that those numbers are mistaken. But it appears to be not a number they want to challenge because government and the feedlot fish farms are selling the same myth, that these are good for rural communities, when in fact the numbers don't add up.
So, I've been taught, because, there's a lot of companies, and you look at websites of the fish companies, you go on their websites, and they paint this great picture of what they're doing. They really are great marketers, advertising. They're great at embellishing. They're great at trying to sell their product. And I've always been taught that you really go, if you want to know the quality of a fish farm, you go talk to the locals in the community. You find out really what a fish farm is about by understanding what they do to the community, how the community members look at them, and so forth. I'm assuming that we can hold true in this part of Canada as well.
No question we can. They are good marketers. Part of the reason they've become good marketers is they, more than anyone, are aware of the negative external impacts of what they do. For instance, in a typical fish farm, in a 16 to 18 month production program, 200,000 pounds of fecal and food waste fall from the pen to the ocean bottom. 200,000 pounds over a 16 to an 18 month process. Fecal and food waste come from this activity. If you and I go out in a small boat and we throw a potato chip overboard, they will throw the book at us. But fish farmers are allowed to generate that kind of fecal and food waste, and no one says a word. That's highly disruptive to the local ocean bottom. It disrupts, if not places in jeopardy, some wild fisheries. In a typical fish farm, there are a significant number of escapes of either farm-raised salmon or trout. In the case of salmon, they will intermingle with our wild Atlantic salmon and diminish the species. There are about 8 or 10 aspects of fish farming out in the ocean that are really, really hurtful. So the fish farms have been quite good at painting a pristine picture. Probably the key reason they're able to do it is that the bad stuff associated with a fish farm is all underwater. What you see at the surface level, I find quite appealing. You know, you look at nets out in the water and activity and employees feeding the fish, and you think, gracious, what a wonderful business. If you go send divers down and have them look at the fish, 100, 200,000 fish cramped in a fish pen without normal circulation, without normal oxygen content, without any temperature control, extremes of warm and cold throughout the course of the year, and then look at the waste on bottom, all of a sudden that picture that looked on the surface is not at all reflected in what's on ocean bottom. So yes, they've become pretty good marketers telling you the story at the surface. What they hide and don't disclose is what's taking place down below.
What do they claim is happening to the fecal and food matter that goes onto the bottom of the ocean floor there? Are they claiming that this isn't harmful? Are they claiming that they're moving the pens to rotate? If they do move the site, what exactly happens? Are they allowed to move the site? Because some fish farms say, well, we rotate areas that we farm and let the ocean floor regenerate.
Yes, well, that's exactly what they claim. They would claim they have a rotation process. They would claim that the waste on bottom gets sifted and reestablished, through, they're frequently in areas of high current and high tidal action. So the notion is that the waste gets swept up and diluted. The truth is, we've had studies done of this now in Atlantic Canada. The sad story is that when food waste develops underneath a pen, in 10 or 15 years, it may not dissipate. It becomes very, very attached, shall we say, to the ocean bottom. It creates what are known as dead zones, where there's insufficient oxygen, where there's highly toxic conditions because of the buildup of fecal matter. So the feedlot farmers aren't going to tell you this, but even after a number of years, it's not a pretty picture. The dissipation does not take place to the extent or as quickly as they would suggest it does. Obviously, about the last thing they want to talk about is fecal and food waste on bottom. So they tell you many other parts of the story. They don't go into detail on that because it's so horrific.
So there's some companies out there like Cook Aquaculture. Cook Aquaculture owns the brand True North. Are you familiar with the True North label? So even chefs in my area put on their menu sustainably farmed True North salmon. Can you offer any insights on the True North label versus what Cook does in other locations? Is there an actual True North farm? Is there a farm that you can pull up to, like Martha Stewart says, and here's the farm? Or are they pulling, is this a brand that they pull supposedly they're better fish from 4, 5, 6, 7 areas? Do you have any insights on what True North actually is versus the rest of Cook Aquaculture?
I have a number of insights and a number of experiences and familiarity. I tend to be a little cautious what I say because Cook Aquaculture, tend to be quite proactive in resisting any commentary. So they're quite legalistic. They're quite anxious to quiet some of their opposition. So have to be a little bit cautious in how we describe them.
Okay.
Suffice to say that that if you're judged by those in your community who see the way in which you actually engage your business, Cook Aquaculture doesn't have a very good reputation. I'm sure you're familiar with the recent encounters they have had in the state of Washington on the West Coast.
I sure am. In case there's any listeners that aren't, but they're basically getting evicted out of there in most of their locations.
Correct. They are losing. They're going to lose their lease rights. They are claimed to have placed in jeopardy the ocean waters and the people who live by them by their actions. And not only that, they've been so reckless that the state of Washington is now about to embark upon a process where all open net pen fish farms are going to lose their leases and lose their capacity over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So their behavior in the state of Washington was really reprehensible. They pushed the limit far beyond what any of their firms could justify. The state of Washington is taking action. The province of British Columbia, watching these activities in the state of Washington, is now revisiting this whole area and contemplating how they oblige open net fish farms to relocate to closed containment facilities on land. Here in Nova Scotia, here in Atlantic Canada, we have an ideal circumstance in which these fish farms could relocate from out in the ocean, polluting with impunity, relocate on land. The fecal and food waste is recaptured and can be used for fertilizer. The circumstances are such that they don't need to use pesticides to treat lice because the fish aren't compacted as they are with net pens, so they don't contract lice. The entire business model, when conducted on land, is far better. Not perfect, mind you, but far better. Consumers who are aware will happily pay $1, $2 extra a pound for on-land closed containment raised fish as opposed to feedlot fish out in the ocean. So, no, Cook aquaculture comes with a reputation. It's not a great one, and it's well-deserved. They're big, they're ambitious, they like to flex their corporate and legal muscle, but it should be noted that their purchases over the last 5 years, their acquisitions have all been in the wild fishery. They have not been in additional open net pen aquaculture. They see the writing on the wall. They're looking for places like Atlantic Canada, like Chile, where there may not be the awareness of the negativity of the business. In America, I give you folks great credit. You're very much at the front of the line to say, look, this is not appropriate in our coastal waters. The standards of scrutiny, the standards of behavior are far higher in America than they are in Canada or Chile. But we're all going to learn sooner or later that this is not an acceptable business model. There are other ways to raise fish sustainably on land. You have to pay your electrical bill, and that's what bothers the fish farmers so much. We have a utility bill in our company, in Live Lobster, which is quite substantial. We have to refrigerate our water. We have to filter our water. It's quite costly to keep the most pristine environment in which we hold our lobster. The same principles apply for salmon or trout. On land, you have to pay that utility cost, but the market will bear the cost. Feedlot fish out in the ocean is simply a bottom feeder model, no pun intended, and many, many consumers want no part of that kind of fish.
Right. You know, my feeling is, you know, we have too many options as chefs. We have too many options to buy cheap food. We have too many options to buy plastic straws that aren't biodegradable. We have too many options to buy chemicals to clean that aren't biodegradable, that aren't earth friendly. If everyone was on the same playing field, the cost is the cost. This is what it is. This is what it costs, unfortunately, to buy salmon, to buy food, to buy whatever ingredient is And frustrates me that restaurants will people buy based upon price, and that restaurants are willing to exploit that. And what really drives me crazy is that chefs are willing to say that, well, this salmon is sustainable because it's farmed, or on top of that, a lot of chefs are willing and downright mislead consumers and saying, well, our salmon is farmed wild, and it's really not wild. Now, I speak to a lot of chefs, I speak to a lot of restaurants, and it drives me crazy. As a young chef apprentice back in the early 90s, actually mid-90s, I was at a chef's culinary meeting, American Culinary Federation meeting, and I heard one of the chefs bragging how he serves tilapia, and he calls it snapper, and he charges that much more for it. And I was like, gee, I'm surrounded by a bunch of crooks. And there are other chefs saying instances how they keep their food costs down and how they trick the consumers with switching ingredients out and how they pound out turkey breast and call it veal. And I was totally appalled, and that really stuck into me. And I'm like, you know what? I never want to be that chef. I never want to be the chef that is tricking consumers, that has to basically lie and cheat to make money. So my passion became very quickly after that about real food, real ingredients. And in the last 10 years, I have no problem calling out chefs and listing their names who are the ones that are out there that are deceiving people. Well, I was just in Las Vegas 2 weeks ago, and I visited a lot of celebrity chef restaurants, and I just missed Rick Muin by 5 minutes because I had some questions for him. I was armed and loaded. I wanted to find out why he supports True North. I wanted to get his take on it. I also wanted to find out why he's supporting Scottish salmon in his sushi counter at the restaurant there, supposedly the godfather of sustainable seafood. Has been sold on farmed salmon from 2 different areas. So I wanted to get his take on it. Of course, I just missed him. I got to give his chef an earful, and his chef was shocked with all the information that I gave him, and he goes, I don't know why we're supporting these. I said, well, you need to ask Rick that. I've made several videos with Rick's name in the title. I know Rick has probably gotten a hold of these videos, and I've been asking for a response from him with nothing, zip, zero, zilch as a response. So my goal is to keep hitting up chefs that are doing this, that have veered off onto this side, that have been either bought or been convinced somehow. But a lot of chefs in general, when I speak to them, they know that serving farmed salmon is not the answer. They know that it's a bad thing. They know that it's a dirty industry. But they're willing to twist the description of farmed salmon into something like, well, it's raised in the wild. It's out in the ocean. It's sort of free range. It has nothing added to it. It's chemical free. It's all natural. It's in the ocean. It's sort of in nets. It's not quite wild, but it's not quite farmed, is what I hear these guys justify with what they're serving. And when you go on some of these websites, like I said, like you go to the Faroe Islands, their website basically says salmon raised in the wild. And it's really confusing for a chef or actually consumers. So, are there any salmon farms out there in open pen systems, not in containment systems on inland, but out there in the ocean, in the bays, that are doing a better job? How much? Obviously, the industry.
Well, it's hard to do a better job of something that is fundamentally flawed from the get-go. They can do marginally better work if they use fewer pesticides or they cram fewer fish in a cage. I mean, nothing is so ridiculous as to say these are essentially free-range salmon. They are constrained within a pen. If you went underwater with diving gear and cameras, you would be appalled at the extent to which these fish are constrained within the open net pen. So free range and feedlot fish are not two phrases that should be used in the same expression. I'm sympathetic to the position in which chefs find themselves. I have enough background in your side of the industry to know that you need essentially a 300% margin over your basic food costs to make a justifiable enterprise in most communities in North America. And as food costs increase substantially, trying to build in that margin to have a successful and sustainable restaurant is not easy. So in general, I'm very sympathetic to the position in which you folks find yourself. And I know chefs who are terrific and part of the solution and who are really, really committed to legitimately wild products and legitimately local products. And I know chefs who are willing to sell their soul to make a good business model. I think it comes down to labeling. I don't think, for instance, you can call feedlot fish fresh Atlantic salmon. You put a big banner in a retail setting or in a restaurant setting and say fresh Atlantic salmon, it gives you a wonderful sense of the product that's being offered. It must be healthy. My God, could it be anything but healthy? That fresh Atlantic salmon can actually be farm-raised, feedlot, pesticide-laced salmon or trout. So I think we need, in Canada in particular, and probably in America as well, we need much better labeling. We need additional education for not only chefs, but for consumers generally. Here in Canada, I would say conservatively 20% of our population are very aware of the limitations and the risks associated with feedlot fish, and they want nothing to do with them. 80% of the population is either unaware, or if they are aware, they find the price points sufficiently helpful that they're willing to eat feedlot fish because it's less expensive. Now, once again, just as I'm sympathetic to chefs, I'm sympathetic to consumers. It's so expensive in the grocery stores today, in restaurants today. If you have a family and you're providing for them, it's expensive. So I know and I understand why people would be lured by a dangerous product. But it's up to the government, it's up to industry regulation, it's up to a whole range of groups to educate people that this is really not a product you should be purchasing. Here is the alternative. It's slightly more expensive, but it's a far better dining experience, and it's actually sustainable. It takes more fish to raise a fish in a feedlot operation than the fish you produce. So whenever they say it's sustainable, that's laughable. The fish consume more fish in growing than are produced in the end. That's an interesting aspect.
What are some of the other proteins that we can find in fish pellets? I understand that Cook Aquaculture owns a rendering plant, but just across the board, what are some of the other proteins? Well,
there are a whole range of food types, for instance, that are in food pellets. I mean, it covers the gamut, including chicken feathers, believe it or not. It's not an area in which I'm all that knowledgeable, and frankly, some of the aspects that are fed to the salmon are so reprehensible, I almost don't want to know about it. I don't want to hear about it, but chicken feathers is the one that comes to mind. These are not, a lot of the food pellets can't possibly be for human consumption. They're labeled right on the packaging, not for human consumption. Well,
it's funny you say that because Martha Stewart got on TV in her endorsement of True North and said that she ate the pellets because she wanted to make sure that with the fish are eating something very pure, that she is actually comfortable eating the pellets.
Yes, well, she probably had her stomach pumped out afterwards. I don't know what to say. I mean, you see stunts all the time where water is tainted in a community and someone will take a drinking glass and say, look, I love that water. You know, if I'm prepared to drink it, so can you. That's just stunt publicity. It's often not properly documented or verified. I'm unfamiliar with Martha Stewart's endorsement of True North or virtually anybody else, but all I'm here to say is that if you look at the fundamentals of the business model, what is being fed, what is being produced, the circumstances under which that product is raised, the escapes associated, the environmental pollution associated, the lack of coastal employment that is promised and never delivered upon, and the reliance of the industry upon compensation, subsidy, afterwards when things go poorly. When you look at the entirety of the business model, it does not add up. It's not acceptable. It's not what it appears to be. If they would move on land and do it in a closed containment format, 85% of the objectionable aspects of the business would be dealt with. But they don't want to do that because they don't want to pay the utility cost.
Okay, that makes sense. I heard it's also about a 7-to-1 investment in capital to build a containment system inland as opposed to throwing nets out in the ocean.
Well, I can say that on the coast of Maine and certainly here in Atlantic Canada, we have what I would call underutilized fish plants. We have a number of facilities that are not producing to capacity for one of 20 possible reasons. A group of those underutilized fish plants could be converted for 30 cents on the dollar, 40 cents on the dollar into on-land closed containment facilities that would raise salmon and trout. The technology exists. It's being done increasingly. There's some significant new announcements both in North America and in Europe of on-land closed containment facilities that are being developed that will have huge capacity, that will produce a fish that under all reasonable scrutiny is pretty darn acceptable, miles ahead of open net pen fish farms. So that's the future, and the future is now. Open net pen farms are something stuck in 1958 that some of the fish farmers are just not prepared to move on from. But I'm very confident in their boardrooms. Cook Aquaculture and others know how this has to play out, and they know that the future is in wild-caught fisheries and in on-land closed containment capability. It's not in feedlot salmon and trout, that's for sure.
I would totally agree with you that they see the writing on the wall. When you go to Cook Aquaculture's website, they list a lot of credentials on their website. And you had mentioned that they're investing in wild fisheries, which they are. You can go there and you can go on their site and buy wild Alaskan salmon or their farmed salmon. And they list on the bottom all these credentials like Friends of the Sea, Monterey Bay Aquarium, Alaskan Seafood Council. And it turns out that all those logos down there are actually for their wild-caught salmon, not their farmed product, not their farmed counterpart.
Agreed.
And it's very misleading to the consumer who looks at the website and says, wow, this company's doing everything right. Look at all these endorsements, certifications, accreditations, affiliations, whatever it is. Look at all these good things this company has involved with them. And I find that extremely, extremely misleading on their website. And I personally don't trust a company I don't trust any of the companies, first of all. And but one in particular, Marine Harvest, was after me for a while online. They kept going on and commenting on every post I've done for a long time. They did it for about 2 years to me, trying to debunk everything I was posting, trying to say it's old science, trying to say that's not the case anymore. I mean, you name it, they were after me left and right, all over Twitter, on my blog posts. They just kept bombarding me left and right. And I still kept posting away and kept posting away and kept posting away. I paid no attention to them. As far as in the lobster world, which you're involved in, have you noticed any trends of lobster? I mean, you said that the one time that everything went belly up, basically. Have you noticed anything else as far as the lobster catch is going down? Other Have other fishermen claimed that their industry's down? Are there other impacts besides putting toxic salmon on a plate and what we're calling their environment there? What's happening with the other with the other?
Well, the short
seafood?
answer is relative to lobster. Unfortunately, we really don't know the impacts. And here's the reason. Lobster catches have grown exponentially in the last 10 to 12 years. The catch has doubled in Canada, and it was doubling in America over the last 10 to 12 years. The reason for that, there are many, but the biggest single reason is the diminishment of ground fish here in Canada. We have less haddock and cod and hake than we used to have. Ground fish are natural predators of lobster. So if there are fewer natural predators, more of the lobster reach maturity, and they can breed exponentially. So unlike virtually everything in the sea, Homerus americanus, North American lobster, has grown in the catch, doubled, as I say, in the last 10 years, so that in an environment in which the catch is doubling, it's very difficult to see isolated areas in which lobster very much could be diminished by virtue of its proximity or impacts from fish farms. If catches were diminishing and fish farms were adjacent and there were further reductions, it would be a whole lot easier to identify. I think we would have had greater catch in lobster had they not been exposed to pesticides and dead zones and so forth that are created in fish farms. But suffice to say, it's very contentious. We don't have as much technical data as we would like to have. We just know that some of these practices are, in very, very small portions, absolutely lethal to lobster and other shellfish. So I'm convinced it has been a downward pressure on the stock, but it's not as easily documented when the stock itself is flourishing quite nicely. Thank you very much.
Right. So, yeah, it sounds like there's many components.
We're a good news story, and this is bad news within a good news story. Live lobster certainly in Canada and up until very recently in America. This year, the catch in Maine, for instance, dropped a little bit. But we're a good news story, so it's hard to identify precisely what the bad news impact is within a very favorable good news story. That's the challenge. I love data, but I only love data when it's accurate and uncontested, and some of this is difficult.
Right, I can see that. So is there anything else that you want to add? Anything that consumers, chefs should know?
No, I applaud you, Marco, for doing the work that you do, for raising the consciousness among your clients and among the chef community and the community at large. I just happen to know about wild fisheries and the impact of feedlot aquaculture, and because of our experiences, we're happy to speak out about it. But there are so many areas among the food groups and the products that we consume that require a little more explanation and probably a whole lot more supervision. There is some bad behavior that we've reflected upon in the last few minutes in our conversation. I'm hoping that people like you and our company can shed some light on this topic so that people are better informed and people are in a position to ask probing questions. If you have a good, healthy, sustainable product, you should welcome these questions, not be concerned by them. And I don't think that's the case with feedlot aquaculture. So I applaud your effort, and I encourage your customers to inform themselves as best they can.
Great. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I appreciate it.